Um,
Recording is on.
Perfect. Welcome everyone to the January 2022 community call. It's a new year. We have a lot of interesting stuff in the pipeline for the year. Kicking it off with the community call today, where we have a few items. We will start by hearing from Peter Sanford, working on the Wormhole William project. Elias will guide us through a little bit of the state of Gio from a 10,000 feet perspective. And I will share a little bit about how we are doing financially, our status on Open Collective. But with that, Peter, if you could please start us off with your work on Wormhole William. We're all excited to hear what you have to bring.
All right, thanks so much. Let me share my screen. All right, so this is going to be an experience report of just what it was like for me developing this app. I'm not really a GUI person, so I definitely come from this, I don't think I knew what immediate mode UIs were before starting this project. But yeah, hopefully this will be useful. So to start us off with just a little bit of background about what Wormhole William is. It's a secure file transfer application for transferring, doing end-to-end file encryption transfers. It is based on the Magic Wormhole protocol. So there's an existing tool called Magic Wormhole that was originally written in Python, and now there's multiple implementations of it. And Wormhole William is a Go implementation of that tool. It's really designed for sending files between two computers or two machines that don't have an existing relationship. So if I want to send a file from my laptop to your laptop, and I don't want to, share it in some cloud storage, this is a great tool for doing that. And the Wormhole William project was initially designed to be a Go library and CLI, with the idea that other people could build their own UIs and integrate it into their own tools. And I made the CLI initially just to make sure that the library made sense. But there have been a few other projects that have now incorporated it, and I've obviously incorporated it in my UI. So if we, I think probably to understand it, maybe just best to do a demo real quick. Here I've got my desktop command line on the left, and my Android phone emulator on the right. So let's say if we go into our files here, we've got a few files that, let's say we want to get off of my phone and onto my desktop. We can go ahead and open up Wormhole William. We can say send file, and that will open our file browser, and we can go ahead and select our logo. And what happens is we're given it's called a wormhole code, and it's basically a short, easy to type code that allows the two computers to first discover each other and then do an authenticated key exchange to get cryptographic keys shared from one side to the other, and then actually do the file transfer. So on the desktop, if we say Wormhole William receive, and we say, we give it our wormhole code. We establish a connection and have already done the key exchange at this point, and now the phone has sent some metadata saying here's the file size and the name of the file, and we're given the option to accept or reject the transfer. So we'll go ahead and accept it, and after a few seconds of actually finding each other on the internet, we get the file transfer, and then that file shows up locally. Likewise, we can send the other direction, so we can say Wormhole William sends, and send this file. And in the Wormhole William mobile app, we can enter our code and say receive, and we get the same flow in the mobile app. So go ahead and accept that. The first time you do this, you have to give it permission to access storage. So we'll allow. And we get a download notification, maybe. Yep. And if we look in our files, we don't actually see it. Let's see. I think this is just an emulator issue. Maybe if we relaunch files. There it is. So it's gotten downloaded. That's kind of the flow for what Magic Wormhole is and what Wormhole William is normally. I can show a few other things that are kind of interesting to this app, kind of outside of just like as a Gio app. So it supports sharing intents. So in an external app, we can say share and select Wormhole William, and that'll take us straight into the share workflow. And then it also supports scanning QR codes, which I'm not going to be able to fully demo because this is just running on an emulator, and I don't know how to do that magic of getting it to use my desktop as a camera. But we can see what the emulator thinks thinks of as its camera, and like the workflow for this is just you say send with -- QR, and it prints out a giant QR code that you can scan with your phone. But we won't go through that full flow. Yeah, so that's the basics of the app itself. If we kind of look at what my experience was like developing this app, Gio wasn't the first thing that I looked at for building, and I kind of had some false starts where I got frustrated and gave up with some other options. So I started with making a React Native app. I got it minimally working in the most hacky sense, but was able to like transfer files to and from my phone. But then I put it down for a little while and picked it back up. Maybe it was on a different computer, and I couldn't get it to build again. And that's something that really I found with a lot of open source Android apps, at least, that it's very easy for the tool chains to move faster than the code. Like the code can become the build process can become stale and be very difficult to build with like a modern tool chain. And this was after a few months, and it really made me nervous about I don't want to become a React Native expert to maintain this hobby project. And there was there's just so much going on with React Native. It's so it's so big. And again, I don't want to be I'm not a full-time React Native developer, and so but I would like to have some understanding of what's going on, and it was very difficult to actually understand. And I looked at Java also, and got incredibly frustrated that you're basically like any documentation, it's all just talking about using Android Studio, and that is a workflow that is not very good for me. I really just want to be able to build with build tools and edit in my editor of choice. I do not enjoy using Android Studio. So I kind of gave up on that also. So why did Gio work when these other options didn't work? I would say the number one thing was easy onboarding. Like I was able to go from no experience to like feeling confident that yes, I can turn this into an actual working app in a very short amount of time. That was like really important for me. And so I would say that the Hello World examples and having the ability to build and run those on a real device were the things that made me excited about Gio initially. The other kind of core pieces were so I would say for the Hello World stuff, just having that running on my phone and then being able to edit and iterate on it and copy and paste and not know how all the pieces fit together, but to see that like, yep, I can make the very simple UI that I need to build this app with the components that are already here. I don't have to build everything from scratch myself. I've felt good about that. And then the other piece is like hooking into the actual operating system APIs is obviously very important for any non-trivial app. And there were enough examples that I felt like it would work and I wouldn't have to worry about it. And then I also got excellent support in the Gopher Slack when I had questions. So that was also made me feel really good about using this and being able to work through any problems that I ran into. And just having existing open source Gio libraries or applications for Android and for desktop was very important for me to like understand how the pieces fit together. So the Tailscale Android app, looking at that as a resource to just understand like, oh, this is what a reasonable implementation would look like, helped me a lot. So we can look at a few code examples of just kind of things that I thought were mildly interesting. I don't think like there's not anything like super crazy about this app. It's calling into the existing Wormhole William library to actually do all of the encryption and file transfer stuff. And so it's just kind of gluing a bunch of things together. But I would say the most interesting things from my perspective was like making the interaction between the Go code and the native Java APIs work. That felt like the place where I had to kind of learn the most. So we'll look at some of those examples. The first one was the share intent. The Java APIs, this when a file gets shared to an application, the application gets a URI for the file, not a path on the file system, but a URI that you have to interact with using specific APIs. So it's a little tricky to like take that and access it directly from Go. Maybe there's a way to do it, but I found it was a lot easier to accept the intent, copy the file in Java from the URI, open it using the URI, and then copy the file into app local storage, like the app cache directory, and then trigger an event on a channel to say there's this file that's ready to be sent to pass it off to the Go code. Having an intent come into the UI run loop just from a channel was really felt nice and really made a lot of sense from like how the UI pieces of it work. So here's a simplified version of the Java handler. You can see the thing that we're getting is this URI, and the way that we interact with that is we call open input stream on a content resolver to turn that into a thing that we can read. So then we open a file in the cacher, and we copy that stream to that cache directory file, and then we make sure that our main activity is running, and call this got shared item method, which is a call into Cgo to hook into our actual application. So that Cgo code is really doing the minimal amount of converting from the Java types to a Go type that the UI can interact with, and then it just writes to a channel saying that this event came in. And then in the actual run loop, we just get this nice standard event on a channel, and then we can trigger the normal flow from there. So there's like a bunch of glue that you have to put together to like make that happen, but it ends up being nice from the like develop the Go piece of things actually in the UI code. It just kind of integrates very nicely. And the download file going the other direction, when we receive a file, it does basically something very similar, where we in our Go code will save the file to app local storage, and then after it's downloaded, we'll pass it off to some Java code to actually copy it out to the downloads directory and trigger the download manager, so the file actually appears in like when you go to downloads in your file manager, or in your browser, wherever. You have to actually it's not enough to just put the file on the file system. You actually have to tell the download manager about the file. So for this direction, we do something very similar. Just we start with in Go, where we'll write the file to a temporary directory to the cacher, and then we call into our Java code to notify the download manager. And this again does something very similar, where we then copy the file from that app cache directory to the actual downloads directory, and trigger our download manager to say this file exists, so that it shows up, and it also gets the file successfully downloaded notification. So quickly, just talking about things that I wish were better. I've got some Gio specific things and some Android specific things, and yeah, these are really my hopes and dreams for how I wish the development experience was sometime in the future. I feel like the big thing that I wish Gio had right now is something that felt more native for the copy and paste experience on mobile. I think that it's fine. It works, but it doesn't feel it really makes it feel not like a native app, to not have kind of the native copy paste experience. On the Android side of things, supporting devices is just as bad as people say it is. It's really surprising how the same APIs behave differently on different systems, and permissions behave differently just between manufacturers, like on the same OS release. That was surprising to me, and on like not obscure manufacturers also. Just like between Pixel and Samsung, there's like significant differences within the same OS release. So that was challenging to figure out and track down. like how the behaviors are different. On the Gio side, I was able to write the Java code to interact with the system APIs to make things work. But I think that still will be very challenging for lots of people to write non-trivial applications. Having to write Cgo and Java is like a lot of like why I want to use Gio is to be able to write everything in Go. So the less Java that people have to write, I think the better overall experience it will be. Another thing that was painful with Android is just it doesn't feel like you're building on like stable ground with the way APIs are deprecated and changed in every version. And the kind of some of the release policies around the Android App Store, where, you know, existing apps, if you don't ever change your app, it'll continue to work on new phones. But if you want to make, you know, do a new minor release, there may be new policies in place about minimal versions and what you support and don't support and upload formats and all of that. And so I don't love that experience. I really want my app, if I didn't touch it for the next 10 years, I'd really like for it to still be buildable and loadable on a phone in 10 years without having to do any changes. And I suspect that it's very unlikely to be the case. And then something I've been thinking about recently is I'd really love like a better understanding of how to do automated functional testing when I do a new build. So I've just started to look into this. I know that Android has this bunch of frameworks. I think Espresso is one. And I haven't seen a lot of examples of like how to actually do this. And so that's something that I feel like would be better for new developers coming online, developing Gio apps. And then something that was a hope and dream until just recently was accessibility support and screen reader support. But that I did a new release in the last month to incorporate that, and that is working great. And I've gotten feedback saying that it now works perfectly for the small number of users who require that from Wormhole William. So I'm very appreciative that landed at the end of last year. And with that, I do have some kind of future plans. At some point, I'll probably do iOS, but I started working on iOS and got pretty grumpy about Apple policies around that felt hostile to open source development. So I kind of put that down for a bit, but I'll probably get back to it. I want to be able to generate QR codes on the phone. At the moment, it can scan, but it doesn't do the generation. So that's something that's on my to-do list. And I don't feel like it's a very pretty app. So some making it more attractive and less utilitarian, maybe equally utilitarian, but prettier is something that I'd like to do at some point. And so that is it. I'm happy to take questions yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter. I wanted to jump in to let you know that Elias apparently knows the Eldritch rituals required to extract a file descriptor from that Android URI and has linked you in the Jitsi chat, has linked you some rituals you can follow that will allow you to open the URI without copying the file into local storage.
Oh, very cool.
It's actually from the Tailscale app as well.
I will definitely check that out then. Yeah, maybe I can get rid of half of my Java code.
I feel your pain on having to write a lot of Java code. I don't know an easy answer when you have to access novel APIs. You know, we can always use the JNI package to invoke the Java API, but whenever it uses a callback or you know, you need to supply a custom object satisfying some interface, I'm really not sure how we could avoid it, but it is a pain point for sure.
In your slides, you did a copying from on the Java side, copying to the downloads folder when an incoming file was. Can you find that slide again?
Sure. Let's see this slide, I think.
That's the one. Why did you choose to? Is it just for example's sake? Choose to write that code in Java?
This code went through some iterations. I mean, I definitely could be writing the file to the downloads directory, at least looking at this now, from Go.
Okay.
And then
just curious if there was something blocking you, for something more fundamental blocking you from not having that much Java specific code.
Yeah, I don't remember the details about why this all ended up in Java.
We're very pleased to hear that the accessibility support is working well for your users. That's really encouraging.
Yes.
And I was going to say, when you were talking about automated testing, something that I'm not sure if anyone's had a chance to attempt yet, but something that we've been talking about is using the same semantic information in the UI that powers the screen readers to drive the UI programmatically for test purposes. I think that's like a really interesting direction, since that information is already there. You know, you don't have to go out of your way to add it. And it might let you, you know, verify certain workflows are working as expected.
And
yeah, that would be
more
very
stable
cool.
than finding the buttons by coordinates. That's probably the most interesting reason to use semantic information instead of just saying, okay, I'll press the button at 300 point, 400 XY, and then whenever you change the UI in minor ways, all the tests will break. So that's at least, that would be interesting to do that. Not at least because then you as a developer will then be forced to make sure that the semantic information is actually up to date and correct, and is a good representation of your program. So.
Yeah, I just started thinking about this, and I was looking at the Amazon device farm API that they have for running tests across multiple real devices.
But that's a slightly different use case, isn't it? For ensuring compatibility across devices, or?
Yeah, I mean, you can use it in a bunch of different ways. You can run automated, like functional end-to-end tests with it, or you can also use it for, like, you can manually drive the devices if you want to debug issues. I definitely am. I find myself, when I'm cutting a new release, like, I've done a minor change and I don't really want to re-functionally test everything, but I also know that it's really important to do that. And so just like having some place where I can run those tests on a real device and get some confidence is kind of what I'm thinking I want.
Okay, I asked because the best case would be you running it locally somehow, maybe with the integration points marked out, so you can just run go test and then everything will be checked, that the buttons do what they say they do, and you can navigate the user interface and so on. That's what Chris, I believe, meant with using the semantics information to drive tests. So absolutely, if you need to have integration tests with the sharing dialogue and so on, then of course you'd need some way of running on a device or
Yeah, I think driving the UI with the semantic stuff is easiest and simplest for kind of the local Go test use case, but you can probably take advantage of that same stuff using one of the kind of Android end-to-end testing frameworks you mentioned, because I imagine that that's how they work as well, as probably using the accessibility information to find elements.
Yeah, it seems like that's how they work. I've not done much research, but that's what I would expect them to do.
Or simply using the DOM or the explicit hierarchy of widgets. You can look up an ID. You can look up a view given an ID in Android. So I would guess that they would be more direct than just say click this button with this ID, and then the automation software will just find it in the hierarchy and fire off a click or something.
Could I ask you a slightly less technical question, Peter? You mentioned that one of the things you liked by Gio was how it was documented, how you got into it, and it seemed that you have had a pleasant experience, which is of course nice. But do you have any reflections or ideas or suggestions of how we can make that even smoother for someone who's following in your tracks?
Yeah, I mean, I think more examples. Like there cannot be enough examples for people to look at for, you know, all the different types of things that you might want to do. Like that, at least for me, that was the most important thing, was to be able to like start learning by seeing, okay, here's a real working application, and I can copy and paste this into my project and delete things and move things around and see that actually happens. Like that was why it was successful for me. And so just like more examples of everything, I think is always helpful.
So for you, that sort of a real world working project ended up being the Tailscale project, right? Have you seen any other applications that you would think would be like good for a, let's call it, beginner to medium level developer to learn from?
So Tailscale was especially useful when I was getting like closer to actually having a full application of like, okay, I've got a lot of Java code, I've got a lot of Go code. Like, how should I structure those in a way that makes sense? And like, what should like the build process be of, you know, when you need to integrate the Go and Java together, like the process looks different than when you're building just like a pure Go app. So like that was very helpful from Tailscale. There were a bunch of other like little examples that I think Chris and others pointed me to from the Slack channel of just like a lot with interacting with the Android APIs for different examples that was very helpful. I think there were kind of a bunch of like annoying things about actually like releasing an app on the App Store, like kind of the polishing features that you don't think about very often, but end up being kind of important, like having the application icon, having the different sizes for that, was something that like I had to look at how Tailscale was doing it, and at least at the time, the kind of naive thing that the CLI tool was doing wasn't working for me for some reason. I don't remember why. It was like only a single size, and something didn't work right. So like there were a bunch of kind of like details that you don't really think about when you're first building the app, but then became more important later. That either I don't know what the answer is, but either having better documentation for like those workflows also, or improving the CLI so that it's easier to get those things without having to like set up your Java hierarchy, your Android app Java hierarchy to have everything be in the right place, would probably be helpful.
All right.
What did you need? I assume that you set up your app to have the same structure as Tailscale, where you have a separate Android project that then imports or includes a JNI library from generated by GoGui.
Yep,
right?
That's right.
What other than the icon problem, can you think of the list of things that you needed from the CLI tool for you to at least theoretically be able to just use that?
Off the top of my head, I mean, once I added the barcode scanner, that's an external library, and so then it really felt like I needed Gradle to manage all of that stuff. And I think I don't remember exactly.
Because the CLI tool can include compiled Java code automatically by having it placed in your package, your main package, I believe, or just I forget the details, but so it can do that.
Yeah, I think I was doing that initially, if I recall correctly, and then I think it was the icon stuff that made me switch the hierarchy, and then it felt like from getting those third-party libraries in felt more natural to then put them in Gradle. There was something, there's like an Android X library that I needed for something that I also, I don't remember the details of, but also ended up needing to go into Gradle. I'm not sure if I could have done that from the CLI or not.
Probably with some more work, because there's no Gradle integration. It's the package manager, as you say, in Android world is Gradle. So there will probably be more work integrating something that no one else has integrated before. But I think what Lucas is saying in the chat is the most important changes to have in the CLI is whatever stuff goes into your Android manifest XML file. For share intent, you probably had to list the URI or URL.
Yes. Yep. There were a bunch of things I had to add to the manifest.
And if you had services, you need to mention them in the manifest as well.
Right.
Because I would love to get to a place where more things, you can never have, I wouldn't say never, but it's difficult to cover everything. But I would really like to have most things just be workable.
Yeah,
includable from the CLI tool.
I know when I started, there wasn't an option to provide your own manifest file. Is that now an option for the CLI, or can you still not provide an Android manifest, your own Android manifest?
I don't think you can. But Lucas probably knows better. It's been a while since I worked at the lower details.
That was something that felt like if building the manifest is really nice, but having the ability to specify your own felt like it might be a good option, like a good intermediate option for people who need to add like additional intents.
The problem with that, as you probably figured out, is that you have to make sure that the changes that are needed for Gio to function, register the activity and so on, has to somehow work, even if we change the names or the format or something. So I'm a little wary of just adding the option to say, here's the manifest, here's that. So we are off to some kind of merging of XML files, and I'm sure it's possible in some way. It's just not something that is doable by providing a raw manifest.
Merging XML sounds so easy, not at all fraught with peril and fun. I don't know why we're not doing it now. Okay, that's definitely good feedback. I haven't had to build an Android app that was complicated enough to need a custom manifest yet, but I know Lucas has run up against that limitation often. So,
and I've run into it as well. I gave up initially when I made the Tailscale app, because there were so many things that had to be done other than the problems of generating a complete application from the command line. So I pretty early gave up, and that's why I ask you, because I wonder what the state is. Could, for example, the Tailscale app be buildable as from Go to you with maybe a few changes, or maybe a way to import snippets into your manifest or something like that? Yeah. Do you have any comments for your slide mentioned problems on the Gio side? That was mostly, as I understand it, in the integration between the native APIs and Gio itself. Do you have any feedback for what you can call this, the core Gio APIs, the way that you structure programs, something like that? You may, for example, have run into the problem that Chris and company are solving with the scale package, which is structuring how you have multiple screens and sort of switching between them and so on. I know that's not an ideal structure in the Tailscale app, so you may have run into something similar.
There's definitely, I would say, there's a bunch of things that I don't understand. I have in my app that I don't understand what they're doing. I have them there because I found examples or got help. So maybe more documentation on, it's been a while since I've looked at the documentation, but from last year at least, the handling like events, so like touch events, or having for receiving a code, like for receiving a file, you enter the code in on your keyboard, and then you can click the receive button, and then when you click the receive button, I want that to dismiss the keyboard. So that triggers like a is it an OP operation? How, like, I don't have a good mental model for how those events tie into everything else, and so just more documentation on like how that actually works, or how I should be thinking about it, would probably have been helpful. But I also, I'm very appreciative that I don't have to know that. Like, I was able to get this app working without knowing all the abstractions, which I feel like is a positive, but having that available, I think, would also be good.
Have you read the architecture document on the website by any chance?
I probably read it last year. I think I read all the documentation last year. But if there have been major changes, I may be completely speaking from outdated information.
Well, I don't know if there have been major changes, and I don't know if those particular operations are described there. But I will say that document is our current best attempt at explaining the paradigm of operations and events and their relationship. But it would be good. I think we have a fair number of operations now that are probably not even mentioned in there. They just kind of grew. Should probably fix that.
Yeah, but also the architecture document is, at least my view, mostly meant to describe, as you say, the core concepts, which are what are operations, what are events, and how do they interact. So, for example, the operation that Peter mentioned, I think it's show text input or hide text input or something. It's a relatively simple operation that I probably wouldn't mention in the architecture document. That probably belongs in, they say, an Android snippet for doing that. How do I hide the keyboard in Android and use this operation done? So what I'm hearing from Peter is more how is a touch event from Android delivered through that particular button. You say you had to write a button from scratch. And at that part is at least attempted to be described in the architecture document.
Something that I was thinking about fairly recently was when I did the upgrade to get the accessibility improvements. There was an API change related to the operation save and load went away at some point and was replaced with
push and pop.
Push and pop. And I don't know what that does. I just knew I needed to change it, but I don't know if there's documentation on that, but what that actually does was a mystery to me.
There is documentation on that, and it's kind of funny. I think your experience is common to many people building with Gio. But the reason we made this change was to make it easier to understand, because save and load were also inscrutable operations that we kind of did a little superstitiously. It was like, all right, so if I'm going to do anything tricky, if I'm going to do any transformations or input handling, I'm just going to do a save load defensively, because otherwise everything breaks. And so our goal, to an extent, was to clarify what is happening. So now you have to push a clip operation, and while it is pushed, it is, in effect, things are clipped. And then when you pop it, that is no longer true. And the same is true for input and a few other things. So the goal was to make it more explicit and easier to understand. But when you're in that kind of let me refactor my code mode, and you just want to find the equivalent abstraction, there isn't quite a one-to-one anymore.
Yeah, the way you describe it now, it's like I completely understand it, but I definitely didn't when I was doing that refactoring.
All right. Any other questions from anyone to Peter? It sounds like you have been able to cover a lot of ground for us. Thanks for sharing, Peter. I like the perspective, both the technical and the non-technical aspects of your presentation. It's really useful to hear from someone who's coming in and sort of like share their call it onboarding journey. So what's your wrapping it up? What's your next project? What will we see from you in the future?
You know, I've got another Gio Android app that I wrote mostly just for myself, of like just taking, when I take pictures, have to push them automatically to my own cloud service instead of other cloud services. And maybe I'll turn that into something that somebody else could use. But that's what I've been working on.
All right. Right.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time, Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. So, with that, Elias, I was hoping we could hear from you. A little bit of New Year's resolutions, New Year, new opportunities, taking a step back and looking at what Gio has achieved. It's quite a lot. We mentioned in a chat a few months back that as of now, so multiple people are being have their livelihood connected to Gio. It's not only just a project where people make cool stuff on computers. It's actually supporting people's careers. So it's definitely getting traction. And I'm sure that everyone here is convinced that it will continue to do so into next year as well. But maybe you could sort of share some comments from your perspective. What's going on for the upcoming year? Where are we in terms of where you sort of envisioned us to be? And share a little bit about of your thinking of the big picture of Gio.
Yeah, so up until quite recently, I'd say half a year ago or less, I wouldn't even dare think about what the final vision would be in 1.0, even though that my intention right from the beginning, when I released this, I think it's 2019, and I had been working on Gio for a year or two before that. My intention was to reach 1.0 to gain the same stability towards our users, but also sort of close off Gio and not have too many new changes and a maintenance, having a too much of a maintenance nightmare, an upgrade nightmare, and so on. So all the advantages of having a stable release 1.0 in this case for the users and for the maintainers of the project, I wanted that, and you could say envisioned that from the beginning. But up until recently, I wouldn't dare think of what would that actually look like and when could that 1.0 goal actually be reached. And I think what triggered me thinking of 1.0 seriously was in the autumn last year, a few months ago, or some months ago by now, was Chris's work on right to left layout of text and text shaping in general of more complex scripts than English and Western languages. And I knew that from the very beginning that Gio was only capable with the very simple, naive way of laying out text one letter at a time, finding the new lines, switching lines, and so on. It's very easy to write. It's maybe 30 or 40 lines, but it does only work for the Western languages. So when Chris started working on that feature and got a lot of traction from his work, but also from the people from the GoText repository, which it's called now, Benoit, that has been working on the porting Halfbus, which is the large sort of the canonical C++ library for doing complex text shaping. Benoit has ported that to Go, which suddenly made it possible to use for us without having too many C-Go dependencies and native libraries dependencies and so on that I really didn't want to have in the in sort of the required dependencies of Gio. For example, if you have Peter's app or Tailscale, you will have some dependencies if you need to use native libraries, of course, but I didn't want everyone to have to install Halfbus or have a C compiler to build it or it was just not something that I was looking forward to. So that had a big breakthrough last year. And with that, I had a discussion with Chris about that, and me working on accessibility, which is also another, not as big a ticket, not even close to, but also a big-ish ticket going towards 1.0. It occurred to me that with those two things about to be fixed, so accessibility is in, but the right to text layout is still not in, but it's pretty close. There was certainly not that many big features or big-ish features left for 1.0. So what again, that's from the top of my head, there could be more things lurking, but I don't think there are many bigger things than this. So I'm working on Ime support. So concretely, I'm working on making the Android keyboard finally working well with the editor. So you can have text completion and all those nice things that you would expect from any application on Android working well with Gio, and also expanding that support to the desktop platforms. So that's one of the big ticket items I'd like to see fixed for 1.0. And along with that is also, I'm not sure. I don't plan to work on it right now. But what Peter mentioned with native copy pasting would also be important. On the Android phone, you can long press on a text field and then have an option. You can have a selection that you can manipulate with two handles at the start and end of the selection, and with that selection you can cut, copy, you can search, and so on. So that integration I'd also like to see done. And what else? There's drag and drop would also be nice to have fleshed out. There's Pierre has been working on and added recently a API for doing it internally in Gio, and I believe that protocol will form a nice basis to do it externally, so you can drag and drop things to and from other programs or the operating system in general. But of course, that I'd like to see that actually working until we can say the protocol is good enough. And that's probably the theme of 1.0. When we're going to do a 1.0, we have to be quite certain and confident that we don't have to make any breaking changes, or that we will regret some API choice because we didn't cover something. And of course, you can never be sure that something won't come up, but at least I'd like to cover all these usual user interface, UI toolkit features before we do 1.0. So to sum it up, we have very few things. We have Ime, we have copy paste. I'd like to upgrade the compute renderer to the new version that should be working on macOS. But again, that's not, I would like to do that before 1.0, but it's not really a blocker for 1.0. And when that's done, I believe we should talk about, and that could be this year, maybe even the first half of this year, have a discussion of, is this the API, at least the layout and the events and so on, the core API, is this the API I would like to freeze for 1.0? And I think we're pretty close to doing that. And that will also take some time because as was mentioned, for example, the save and load was recently changed. So that's the question I'd like to have answered or looked at, or at least spend some resources on. Are the APIs that we have today the ones that we are happy with? And I could imagine something like a mailing list message asking people for what are the pain points, any pain point with Gio. And it doesn't, they don't have to be actionable. They don't have to be anything more than, this is annoying that this is like this. I can understand why it is, but this is just annoying. Have all those things listed somehow, or even added as to-do item, ticket items in the to-do track. and then go through them with careful review, making sure that yes, this is maybe annoying, but this is the best way we know how to do it, or maybe do something better in this area. I'd like to have sort of a spring cleaning / final review of the entirety of Gio.
So you're talking about Gio, and in my mind, I'm hearing a lot of core functionality. Right? But we have also in the project had some initiatives. For example, Jan Kode's work with the widget, the data table widget, which is like extra functionality, utilizing the core but sitting outside the core itself. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could share a little bit of what you're thinking of core versus satellite or periphery or extra components, and where sort of in your mind where Gio starts, so where Gio ends, and extra functionality that the project still might support, and where that ends, and the community level components or features of functionality, where that comes into play.
The short answer is I don't know. I've discussed this many times, or not many times, but several times with Chris. Where do you draw the line? What is GUX, for example? Is that a staging area to be included in core? Yes, for some things. For example, the grid may go into core immediately, but it could might as well have started as a GUX component and then slowly migrated into core. But and some components may not belong in core, and then the question is, why don't they belong in core? So I don't have a concrete answer for that. I would just say, if we're going to do a 1.0, then we have to be very sure that whatever goes into the package or repository or module that we call 1.0, we can confidently say this will not change, or if it changes, it can be changed by adding it and not by changing it. And I'm not confident that some of the more complex widgets, and it could even be some of the widgets in package material for that matter, the widgets don't have to be that complicated before, at least in my mind, they reach a point where I'm not sure. I can't. It's a nice API, but is it the one for that widget or set of widgets that we would like to keep? So it may be, with that in mind, it may be such that 1.0 Gio will be very little. It could, for example, be the ops package and the layout package and some of the widgets, simply because not that other widgets don't sort of belong there, but we are not sure enough or as sure as the rest of the API that they are stable. There was some saying, I don't know if it originates in the Go community or just in general, that the standard library is where packages or code goes to die. And I think that applies to Gio as well. When we tag something at 1.0, the code is effectively frozen. You can add things, you can put new fields on it, you can add documentation, of course. But if you just take the Go standard library, very little changes. Of course, all the underlying implementation can change drastically if you like. At least if you have the test. For example, package GPU can have an entirely new renderer if you like, but you can't change all the user-facing interfaces. So yeah. Yes, someone mentioned a smaller but still important, because you mentioned it many times in a typical Gio program. For example, the casting of units. The way units are expressed in Gio is not simple as it could be. And I have a whole list in my Trello board with all these stray ideas. Could we do this? Could we do this? Could we do this? So actually, the thing I've mentioned about asking for API changes or API paper cuts, I have already started that by sort of every time I run into things or I see a mailing list suggestion or a to-do a ticket item, I also add it to my Trello if I think this is something that we at least have to consider before 1.0. And I definitely want to do something about, just to take that example, about expressing units more simpler and shorter. And I think Christoph, it was you that suggested simply using default units and saying the APIs that most usually use DPs should just take an integer type expressed in DPs, and the APIs that most usually use SPs, for example, the text APIs, should just take an integer value that that is assumed to be in SPs and so on. I think that will drastically simplify the conversion part. And then the casting itself, we may be able to get rid of that by some type generics magic, but I'm not sure. But definitely that's also something that I've heard many times, and I can feel it when I write graphics code that takes coordinates and positions from events and sizes that you have to convert often to floats, and that's pretty annoying. So it could be as little as spelling. So API, why is this method called this instead of that, which would be simpler? Very simple change, but very important to have done before 1.0, up until redesigning, say, the way we do layout to make, for example, I'd like to get, if we can at all be possible, get rid of all these func, GTX, C, returning a D, which is a dimension, nested structures, if we can. I don't know if we can. I'd like to, I think we mentioned that in the previous call, I'd like to investigate whether we can get the Go escape analysis to help us perhaps write something with interfaces or something that is more ergonomic to express in code, and have our cake and eat it too, in the sense that if the escape analysis pass in the Go compiler can then lift all the allocations out, we can do it for free without worrying, or at least I don't have to worry that an API locks us into many allocations, which will then may slow us down in some targets.
So in terms of usage pickup, what sort of applications do you feel that Gio is ready for now? We've seen good mobile apps, Tailscale, Plato, Peter here as well. Do you believe that is the venue for Gio going forward, or given sort of the amount of platforms that it compiles very happily on, do you think it's ready for prime time on desktop as well?
Yes, I'd say before we had complex scripts, or before we have, because we don't have it yet, and before we have the Ime and before accessibility, Gio is not generally useful. When we get that, we have accessibility. I'm soon done with Ime. Chris is working on the complex script. I'd say that the core features of Gio can be used much more widely. And I believe the next, or at least we could use Peter as an example, the next issue is simply what are the actual problems and troubles and the tiresome parts of developing an app for modern platforms today. That is the integration points. And we're definitely not at a point where I can say you can write everything in Gio as easily as, say, if you're proficient in React or Swift or all the other toolkits. So I would say people that don't have experience, people like Peter and that don't have experience with an existing toolkit that they can sort of compare with and be very proficient and efficiently in, will probably be quite happy working with Gio, at least if they're Go programmers. So that would be simpler apps. Not that Gio couldn't do more complex apps, but as soon as you do more complex apps, you run into the problem that there are not many Gio programmers. So if you want to start a business and say, okay, this Gio is the perfect match for you because you like Go, you have Go developers. It's not a certainty that you should use Gio just for the fact that if you want to hire people to actually do this, you will probably you will have much easier time hiring Android developers or iPhone developers or desktop. Maybe not desktop developers. They're probably much fewer of those than mobile developers. So and that was a point that I had completely missed because I asked Zenly, which is a very large social platform that started in France. I visited them after doing a Go Mobile presentation. And they were very happy with Go Mobile because Go Mobile can generate the code, sort of the glue code that Peter's looking for in his app, but it does have some drawbacks as well. It can generate the glue code between Go and Java and Go and Objective-C, but they still write their applications in the visible layer, the user interface in Swift, it must be, or Objective-C at that point, and Java, because that's what their team does. So when I suggested, why should we look at maybe converting some of your, or doing a prototype of your application in Gio, he immediately, Steve from Zenly retorted that he would not be popular with the mobile teams. That was an issue that I had completely overlooked. That of course there are developers that don't like Go or don't have any experience with Go and are perfectly happy with the tools that they do use. They have Android Studio for Android developers, they use Xcode or whatever they use for iPhone and so on. So it's, well, I guess my point is that Gio is the best match for applications with very custom needs, such as Plato's games that need an interface on top, or for teams or developers that don't have a particular toolkit as their proficiency. So it will initially, or perhaps for a long time, be smaller teams that don't have the resources or don't want to spend the resources to have dedicated mobile developers or UI developers.
And finally, I have to ask, there's a few things happening in the Go world. Something called 118 and something called generics. How is that going to hit us?
I'm not sure. I wanted to do something with units. I think that could be one concrete use case that we can use generics for. I've never written generics code, just to give some context. I've never written anything with the new generics implementation. But I could imagine, just from looking at the examples, that we could have the unit.value be a generic type that would either be DPs, SPs, or pixels, or maybe leave out pixels because they're integers or floats or something, and have DP and SP as a generic. So you can sort of, that would be an alternative to have a API select either DP or SP as their native unit. Just let them take a unit.value type, and you could either pass in an SP or DP, and that difference would be resolved at the lowest level when you do ggx.px. I'm not sure if that would work. Is it efficient enough? I don't know. But that was a concrete example. Sorry?
Well, I think we can build a typeset that is composed of multiple types like that. I'm not sure how easy that would be, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity in writing code that can work with float32 or int. In these cases where it's like, all right, I have a point from this API and I want to give it to this API, it becomes possible to write code that can accept both.
Yes, you're saying that
and of course they're
the graphics ops would be able to do integers and floats.
I think,
because that would be a way. I agree, that would be a way to solve the casting. You're still up. It's more or less a glorified cast. We're saving the casting to floats by having a typeset that includes instant floats, and if it's a float, an integer, it just casts to a float and encodes the graphical operations.
yeah, we should be able to write a generic point, for instance, that can use float 32, float 64, any int type, and that way, we might also be able to resolve the pain of using the math standard library with Gio by accepting float 64s and then coercing them into float 32s ourselves when we need to.
I'm curious what they're going to do with the math package, because this is not just. It seems like the integration with the math package in the standard library should be something that the Go developers, the Go standard library, solves.
That's fair.
So
I hope in Go
I believe they have it. Yeah, exactly. So I believe they are going to release 1.18 with generic support or basic generic support, but not change any of the standard library packages yet. And then they're going to use Go 1.19 or maybe even 20 to come up with the ideal way or canonical ways of adding generic support to libraries that were written without them. So I'm also interested in seeing what they're going to do with the math package. But we may be able to just reuse some of the typesets from that. So that's probably also another 1.0 thing. We should probably, this close to having type sets, we probably shouldn't release 1.0 until we have mature typesets in the Go standard library.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Any other questions, comments, queries, concerns from anyone to Elias on the 10,000 foot picture? All right. Thank you so much for taking a step back and sharing with us, Elias. It's at least for me, I haven't been around for that long, but it's really useful to sort of see the big picture sometimes. So thanks for sharing that. I was thinking
just one comment came to mind when I watched Peter's presentation. My background is, at least professionally, or what I make my money on, my income from, is Android development, and that's the pain of doing Android development, and the annoying APIs and the changing APIs and the build system, the Gradle that breaks all the time that you have to upgrade and so on. All that was definitely a triggering, a motivation or a triggering event for me starting on this Gio adventure. So I really feel your pain of doing especially mobile development. Desktop development has its issues as well, but it's way more difficult and unnecessarily difficult, I believe, on mobiles. So I just wanted to mention that. It's not just you that feel the pain.
But then it sounds like Android pain is a huge opportunity, right? For Gio to step in and resolve some of that.
Yes, in both ways, because some of the pain comes from Android being very, very polished. You have very high expectations if you need to do at least a mass market, whatever you're going to call it. If you have a specialized niche application, you can release it for Android and just have people be happy that it exists for Android. But if you want something that actually reaches many, many people, and that you want to, at least visually and behaviorally, compete with all the other operation apps out there, I would say that's a very tough competition. So yes, we have the opportunity, and that's again one of the reasons I started Gio and wanted to do the Go Gio command line tool and so on. I wanted to have something very easy to get started with, but to be a serious competitor all the other mature toolkits out there. There will probably be some years of us maturing, developing standard libraries for maps integration, notifications that we already have, and so on. So there would be some maturing work, which is sort of ungrateful because I believe the core library is pretty great. And it's very easy to do something in a core way, but as soon as you get to the integration points, which are both uninteresting because they're just integration points, but also one of the biggest time sinks in development of such an application. We definitely, so yes, it's an opportunity, but to capitalize, if you can use that word, on that, we have to have some put some resources into the integration, and that doesn't mean it has to be in 1.0. It can be in GUX or something third party.
Sure.
But there will probably be some, and maybe we can have the resources when 1.0 is out to actually focus more on the integration and make the developer experience better, and improve these packages, make sure they're portable and tested and so on. So, yeah.
Yep. Question in chat. What do you think about some UI designer tool for Gio? Like for example, creating Gio UI code from Figma or Adobe?
Sure.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't have experience with those tools. I've heard about them, but I don't have experience with them.
I can speak to that a little bit. I think it's super possible, and it would be very cool. Sorry about the background noise. But it's a big challenge. We'd have to either, if we wanted a live kind of GUI editor, then we would need a fair bit of, I don't know, probably reflection, or at least like very dynamic constructs. I played with this space a little bit, kind of, when I did the live editing using the Yagi Go interpreter, so that you could like reinterpret part of your GUI at runtime. But this would be several steps beyond that. So I guess at a high level, I think we can build stuff like that for Gio, either to convert code from Figma or Adobe, or to offer some kind of interface similar to those interface design tools, but for Gio. But it is a huge amount of work, and I don't know if that's something that would be part of core, or that Elias and I would be positioned to tackle. But it's possible, and it'd be very useful, I guess, is what I've got for you right now.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll close off before we end the recording with some transparency on our finances. I think that's always nice when we have the privilege of spending the community's resources just to talk about what's going on in the world of money. Let's see if this now works. I'm trying to share a slide. Okay, perfect. So as you know, we started using Open Collective as the sort of financial platform for Gio in middle of last year. It's not the only sort of platform where Gio-related revenue is passed through. I know that there are some sponsorships that were started out on GitHub, and they may or may not continue. I don't have the details on those. Those are like personal sponsorships of Elias and Chris. That's totally fine. So what I'm talking about here is sort of the open collective portion of it. I pasted in chat the link for the page. I think most of you have been there. And sincerely thank you to everyone who has contributed, both personal and corporates. It is really good to see that we are able to get some resources in that we then can get out. So far, we haven't done enough of that, but working on it. The left-hand side just shows the current balance of funds. We basically have 3 accounts or sub-accounts, you can say, under Gio structure. One is just a general account where we have funds for general maintenance. We touched on that the last community call as well, that we should be able to support more of the admin and development work from here. So currently, it's not a lot, but it's more than nothing. $766 here. We have explicitly allocated $500 on the data table widget to be released when Chris approves of the widget. It is getting closer, so I look forward to releasing the funds when Chris accepts the widget. And we also had a little bit of overflow from that. We wanted to get $500 in, and we actually got a little more. We agreed to put that in a sort of future project bucket. So we'll see how much project we get for $43, but if someone has a good idea, we have the money. So that's the balance right now. Looking at how funds have accumulated and been spent through the last half of 21, this includes up until yesterday, so I just stretched the year a little bit. But we have received sponsorships of slightly above $2,000. We have explicitly paid out $300 in an admin to Chris and $300 in engineering to Elias, both of one-time payouts. As mentioned, as discussed, maybe we should do something recurring here. That's food for thought. And there's also a little bit of hosting fee using the Open Collective platform. But so it costs some money to sort of go for this level of transparency, and also the hosting, so that the money is not kept in like anyone's personal bank account. It's actually kept with the Open Collective. So we pay a little bit of a fee for that. But overall, the sign is positive. The amounts are yet a little bit small. I like the idea from the last community call of thinking about grants. That requires some work, but it is an opportunity that, given that both Elias and me are European residents, we should be able to apply for maybe some EU ones. It's a venue that might be interesting to pursue. But at least there you have it. These are the numbers as of right now. Also, please feel free to go into the Open Collective and look at the details there as well. Any questions on this? Okay, pretty good. So with that, we end the recording.